there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to be discussing the game that we just finished playing, Luthier. But before we do, we will be discussing some poll results. Yeah, and I got to say, for those of you who, for those of you that didn't like my pronunciation of Orleans in our Orleans episode, you'll have to let me know what you think of Luthier in our Luthier episode. I don't know. I'm not really sure what to do here anymore. Hopefully that's okay for you. But we do have some poll results to discuss before we get into the game description. The poll I asked was, and I'm already regretting this poll because I just know it's going to be a landmine. So, stick with us. We'll try to get through this quickly. The poll was
jump on that one, Tim. Yeah,
landmines are fun. They make life exciting.
Did the personalities, good or bad, political stances, or past business practices, good or bad, of a publisher or designer influence your willingness to buy a game? The options I gave, yes, that got 28%. Only in extreme cases got 52%, and no got 20%. How would you guys answer this question?
Chris, you want to go first? Since you're just back and fresh off of.
I know. I feel so fresh. I feel like I have so many fresh ideas to bring after being away for so long. And well, I'll start with this one. Yes, the answer to this question is absolutely. I would be affected by the views and the actions of the people that make games. Just like almost anything, I tend to be somebody who likes to vote with their dollars. So if I have a business, say a burger place or a hardware store or whatever, that does things that I think are politically inappropriate, then I tend to try to spend my money elsewhere. And I think the same thing is true of board games. I have heard of a few situations where that kind of thing came up, and I've kind of shied away from those game producers. But it's also true on the flip side as well. If there is a particular organization that does something that I do like or do appreciate, I'm more likely to spend my money on those games. And in particular, we've talked in the past about how we like to highlight designers who are, BIPOC or, underserved communities of various types, or underrepresented designers that you don't hear enough of that type of voice. We like to highlight those kind of designers. And so that's a situation where the person's views or identity could be a positive that might drive me toward a particular game, in addition to just the quality of gameplay.
Yeah, Chris, you nailed it. Vote with your bucks is what I'm going to say. Like you just said, vote with your money, vote with your dollars. It's one of the few ways that you can influence and decide, what's important to you. And then now we do have a little bit of say on the show here. We can talk about publishers that have done things right and publishers that have done things wrong that have bothered us. So that's nice to have a little bit of voice in that sort of realm too, so we can reach all 5 to 60 of our listeners / viewers. But yeah, Chris, you nailed it. I don't want to echo everything you just said because you said it perfectly.
Yeah, I also said yes on this. I do tend to do the same thing, Chris, like you. And it's not just in games. It's anywhere in life where I hear about, a business that's got bad practices or good practices, the way that they, where they put their money. Yeah. So same thing with board games here. One of the interesting things though, and I've been trying to pay pretty close attention to the social media around board game publishing and stuff like that because I'm, making a podcast. But one thing that happened that was interesting is when I stopped being on Twitter, when I kind of pulled the show off of Twitter because of some of the behavior there, most publishers are still really active there. Like that's where, if you want to be involved with publishers, that's where you are. And in fact, a lot of designers, a lot of other content creators, that's the main place. So we moved over to Blue Sky, which is a pretty, friendly community, but it's much smaller, and a lot of publishers never made that leap. And I hate being on Facebook. So even though we have an active community there, I don't interact with anybody outside of our community on Facebook either. So what used to be like really clear to me when somebody did something, that was troubling, or when someone did something great, I barely hear about most of that anymore. So I think I'm more in line with probably how most consumers are these days, which is they don't follow it that close. You're not, and so I think it's interesting. The reason I asked this question actually had to do with, there's a content creator that also happens to work for a publisher that raised a question on Blue Sky this week and said, hey, there's a Kickstarter up, and 2 of the content creators that are featured on there are bad actors in the community. I have no idea what I don't know which Kickstarter they're talking about. I don't know which community members they're talking about. But I did notice on the game we played tonight on Luthier, on their Kickstarter page, there was one content creator on there that I remember being called out probably 4 years ago for something that was said. And I haven't heard anything about it since then. And I would bet that the vast majority of people that are on social media that are listening to these podcasts have no idea that they did anything that was concerning to anybody. And I don't even know who the other person is there, even though I know most of the other content creators, like I know, their personalities and stuff like that. So it's interesting how people that are really focused on the industry and really paying attention, may pick up on some of this stuff. But I think the vast majority of us, we don't actually know when somebody's doing something wrong. So like we might even call out a publisher or like give a game review and not realize that we might be calling out somebody negative. So it's interesting, but I try to, right? If I know something has happened, then I try to follow along with it. So here's how some of our listeners commented. Miles said, I've appreciated publishers trying to minimize or eliminate plastic in the packaging or components, which has made me more interested in buying those games. I wouldn't buy a game solely based on that, but it makes me take notice of what those publishers are doing, which is great, right? This is something that a publisher is doing that's positive and they're paying attention to. And I agree with that too. I like it when I see publishers going out of their way to either do positive things for consumers or positive things for the environment or positive things for the workforces that are creating the games, things like that. That's always good. Dan said, past business practice is a huge factor for me. As someone who got burned severely by Mythic Games, I pay very close attention to past Kickstarter performance by all companies I'm considering doing business with. There are also some other publishers I steer clear of now as well due to poor handling of campaigns or pre-orders for games. That's a great example of like understanding how I think Kickstarter is probably the biggest problem here is that there are some publishers that got paid for games and never delivered them or did a poor job. We've talked about like Peterson Games, for example, recently. And I don't know if you guys have heard recently, but they basically went bankrupt and have sold their assets to somebody else. So you may or may not get your games from a different publisher at this point. But yeah, that's a great call out, Dan.
Just to add an update on the Peterson Games thing, there is some benefactor who bought him out and sent out a whole little package. I don't know if you got that, Chris, or I clicked on some little thing. Yeah, okay, I'll see what you're gonna send me. And this guy, some guy who's super into dragons and dice or whatever, sent out this thing. It's kind of neat actually. It's a little envelope full of a little puzzle, these little cryptic clues. He seems super enthusiastic about games. He's taken over the whole publishing process and putting it out there for Peterson Games. So I'm interested to see where that goes. It seemed at the very least like a nice gesture of something that this guy, contributed his money and he's willing to do, sort of rescue Peterson Games. And that's good that I think, Peterson is not in charge of publishing games anymore. We'll see where it goes. I'm skeptical that anything will happen, but it's a nice gesture at least.
I didn't click on that button. I don't know if I was bored or upset at the time or just forgot to do it, but I didn't click on it. So whatever that little package you got was, I didn't get it.
It was probably a virus. You
probably a virus.
Cybersecurity best practices. No, I think, Adam, what I heard, and again, I may be off. So that was the original message they sent, was it was some big benefactor, right? It turned out that it was actually a different publishing company that purchased the right to finish, making the games.
Yeah.
And getting money for any future publishes. So I think that, again, Peterson told a little fib there and tried to make it pretend like things were more interesting than they actually were. But I could be wrong about that. That was just the gist of the full story that I got.
I wouldn't be shocked.
If you take it at face value, it's actually some guy with some new publishing company that I've never heard of. So, but some guy with lots of money, and he sent out a nice little letter and this this whole little spiel. And his picture and everything, and some cryptic little cards and a little puzzle to solve. So we'll see where it goes. Good.
That's great. You messed up your Kickstarter, give it off to somebody else that's never published games before. That's probably smart.
Should work out just fine.
Yeah, totally. All right. Stephanie said, it's way more likely to influence me in a positive way than in a negative way. I feel like I'm willing to give people the benefit of the doubt when I don't agree with them, and so try to assess the game in isolation. But also my interest in the game may be increased if I agree with the issue, practice, etc. I will say that, when I was paying attention to social media and kind of, some of the drama that came up in the industry in the past, I think you really should, read into it yourself and make your own assessment. Some people like drama, and there were definitely people in this industry, especially some content creators, that knew that they would get more clicks if they raise drama. And, from my perspective, when I saw that happening consistently and saw what it's like they were raising issues with something like, you've never been involved in business before. There's no way you think that was a significant, like, intentional problem type thing. Anyway, I think it's smart. Make your own assessment. And I also like to give people a benefit of the doubt if it looks like they made a mistake, messed up, but then recognize it and are truly trying to solve it. Some people are doing that. Some people are not. They're just making an apology to try to cover their butts. But I think you can at least in some cases give them a little chance. Brooke said, absolutely. I try to maintain ethical consumption practices as much as possible, and this industry makes it easier because everyone is relatively accessible and visible. I want to have some kind of integrity in how I spend my money. So, yeah, I think we've talked about this, other than, again, if you're not really on social media, it's not that visible, I think, to be honest, for most people. Seth said, looking into the political affiliations of anyone I buy goods and services from before I make a purchase just sounds exhausting to me. I don't even want to know the behind the scenes politics of any designer, publisher, artist, or manufacturer. I'm buying a board game from you, not supporting your politics, and that's it. Nothing more. Cthulhu 2024. Put his politics right out there on display.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So anyway, interesting topic. I know there's actually, if you check out our socials, Blue Sky, on our Facebook group and our Patreon group, there's some pretty interesting topics there. And in fact, a couple of specific instances, which I didn't list here, that called out publishers that I wasn't aware of that had made issues. One of the biggest, which I'll just mention to you guys quickly, was Frixilius Games, which of course makes Terraforming Mars. Been a longtime favorite of ours. And so I did a little Googling. I didn't take their word for it, but I did a little Googling and looked up some of the background. And it's some pretty awful stuff, I think, that company's been involved in. And it's definitely going to make me reconsider talking about their games and definitely purchasing anything else from them in the future.
Another one I want to throw out, since I have a tiny bit of voice, is Golden Bell. They've changed their names many times. So you might have to do a little Googling to find out what they're called now. But Golden Bell has a notoriously awful history of unfulfilled Kickstarters, kind of taking money from people and then vanishing numerous times.
Wow.
All right. Well, it's good reason not to back Kickstarters too. Let's move on past that topic and get into Luthier. We'll start with the description of the game.
All right. Well, first, let me get warmed up.
Nice.
Luthier. Okay. Well, now that we got the performance out of the way, let's get on to the game description. In Luthier, 1 to 4 players had families of master instrument makers, also known as luthiers or luthiers. Technically, a luthier is a maker of just stringed instruments, but in this game, players will make all manner of string, wind, percussion instruments ranging from bassoons to timpani. Now, over the course of the 6 rounds, players will take on a number of tasks at various worker placement spaces on the main game board, or on their own personal workshop board. The order of their actions and sometimes the strength of those actions will depend on the experience level of their workers, which are represented by chips numbered between 1 and 5. The chip number represents the experience of the worker and accordingly the effectiveness at getting the task done. So Luthier does deviate in a significant way from standard worker placement in that multiple players can inhabit a single space, and one player can even assign multiple workers to the same space. Now, there's a lot more to this element of the game, including the ability to bolster workers with apprentices and inspiration tokens, but we'll probably get into that a little bit more during our discussion of the game. So for now, let's just focus on what type of actions that those workers can actually take. On the main board, players can visit the salon, which allows them to woo influential patrons, famous composers, nobles, and even royalty, with specific instrumental desires that our intrepid luthiers can fulfill for big points and money. Players can visit the guild to pick up plans for new and exotic instruments. The repair shop lets players pick up a little extra income and points by repairing existing instruments. The performance space lets players show off their instruments by sponsoring performances in classical, baroque, and romantic styles. And then finally, the balcony lets players accomplish public goals. There's also, as an aside, a market where players can spend their hard-earned cash for materials and other benefits. And then back home at the players' workshops, there are spaces for roughing our instruments and putting the finishing touches on them as well. Now, in the middle of all this, there's the orchestra. Each time a player completes a performance, repairs an instrument, or completes a new instrument, they get to place a token there that will ultimately lead to big endgame scoring. At the end of the 6 rounds, the player with the most points will be the winner and the most esteemed luthier in the land. Luthier was designed by Dave Beck and Abe Burson and will be published by Paverson Games. It's currently the crowdfunding campaign for Luthier is live on Kickstarter, and it will be up and running until August 8th. So if anything you hear here tonight sounds interesting, go check it out.
Thanks for the description, Chris. This was our first play for all 3 of us, obviously. We did play on Tabletop Simulator tonight, which is never fun, but that's what we had to play with. I thought it was we don't do a lot of Kickstarters or games that are currently on Kickstarter if they're not at least repeats of other games. It's been a while since we've done one of these. This one, though, I thought was worth visiting. One of the reasons being that Chris listed Distilled as his number 2 game of all time, I believe, on his top 40 list this year. It's a game we've all enjoyed a lot, and that was Dave Beck's Freshman, kind of his first publish. And this is his sophomore publish. So it was very interested in taking another look at a game that he published. I thought Distilled was unique, fun, did some things a little bit different, and but opportunity for growth there as well. So I was excited to see what he brought next. Let's jump into the gameplay and mechanisms. What are you thinking, Chris?
There is a lot to talk about here. This is one where, unlike Distilled, I feel like there was a lot of stuff packed into this game. And the first thing that kind of came to mind to me when I was watching the rules video was just how many different and varying mechanisms Beck and his co-designer brought into this game. And it reminded me at first of Arc Nova, which it probably did not sound like a big recommendation to Adam. But the thing that I found interesting here that I want to talk about first is the way that the turn order works and the way that the actions are actually taken. So I mentioned in the rules description that there's different way that you can place more than one worker on a space. And you can even place 2 workers on a space if you as a player want to take that action twice. Now, what happens, let's say that all 3 of us placed a worker on a space, as can happen. Once that's done, you take that whole pile of workers and you put them over on this little loot neck looking sideboard where you sort out who goes first and what the strength of the actions are. So as a second aside, you can bolster your actions not by the numbered chips, but with these inspiration tokens, which look like little exclamation points, and also with apprentices. And these are both little add-ons that you can get in different ways throughout the game that can make your action stronger. So let's say that I put a 5 out with an apprentice. Adam put a 1 out with 2 inspiration tokens. And Tim, or excuse me, an apprentice. I don't think you can actually use the inspiration tokens there. And then Tim puts out a 3. We would take those apart, and regardless of who went there first, who went there second, you're going to look at who has the highest number of total action points in that space, and then that person's going to go first, and they're going to get to take the action. Now, that can be pretty important because there was a couple of times, I think at least one that Tim complained about, where I went in and did an action first and was able to take a card that he wanted, and so that mattered a lot to him, and so he ended up having to spend money to get a more expensive card. So where that comes in...
It was even worse than that, in that I would have had to spend money to get a more expensive card, but I didn't have the money, so I essentially lost that action. So it was funny coming into that turn. I literally was like, why does it even matter what order we go in, or what order these actions are taken in? But if I had been planning a little bit better, knowing that Chris could have beat me in that space, I should have gone to another space and either sold some resources or taken a different action that got me the money I would have needed to cover my ass. So it definitely it is more impactful, and it's in a very weird way. It's interactive, where you are doing your own engine building, you're building your own puzzle, you're trying to take care of your own things, but you have to be careful about what other actions people are taking, and then the order that you execute your actions, and in turn order, like all these things come together and matter.
Yeah.
Well, it's essentially a blind bid worker placement for order priority. The blind bid is for the order in which you get to execute the turn, and it's a blind, so you don't know until everybody's put their chips out, and then you reveal them. And that's That's cool. That's novel. That's unique. That doesn't exist right now in anything that I know about. So the way that that's been done, I think, is pretty exotic. And maybe you're sort of hinting around that, Chris, but I think that's one of the coolest things about the game that I've seen. One of the coolest things in games that I've seen.
The one game I was thinking of that does have a similar thing is Tricarion, which I've only played
Mhm.
once, and I don't. But it's similar. It's essentially you're kind of assigning your workers of different numbers to spaces. What's different is that the numbers are shown, but the space you're assigning to isn't visible until they all get assigned. But it works in a lot of the same way, where if two people go there and they've got a higher number, you could get blocked out of doing anything useful. So that probably felt the closest to me.
Yeah. And it's particularly important here because the market's pretty small. At the beginning of the game, nobody really has the opportunity. Well, so let me go back a second. In each market, there's 4 cards, 5 if you're playing a 4-player game. And for each of those markets, there's a level 2 and there's a level 3. And there's only 2 cards that are at level 1. And at the beginning of the game, everybody can take level 1 cards for free, but has to pay extra $4 or $8, depending on the level, which is a lot of money in this game, for the level 2 or the level 3 cards. So if you're able to snatch up a card away from somebody, you're saving a lot of money, and you're potentially making it so that that player is going to have to spend a lot of money to get a card. And you look at the game that we were playing tonight, we had 3 players. So in any given situation, you could have 2 players go in and make it so the third player has to spend money on another card.
Well, and I think it was the performance space only has 1 card that doesn't cost money. If I remember,
that's
right.
right.
I think that's what killed me, was that there was only 3 cards there, and Chris took the one that I was going for. But it's beyond making them pay money. Some of these cards are very significant for trying to achieve your Patreon's objectives, and you've got a limited amount of time to achieve them. So all this stuff again matters. Like the timing of it matters. The amount of extra assistance you send to a worker space to try to beat out the other people matters. It's pretty clever.
So you're talking about these Patreons, Tim, and that ties in with your player board. So that's also one of the 4 sort of card markets on the board. The top left one is your Patreons. You can get those cards. You get one at the beginning of the game, kind of a starter Patreon, at least one. And these are people like Mozart or Frederick the Great or Chopin or all these different composers that were around during that era of this beautiful classical music. And so, Tim, you're talking about the performance down there, and then also the repair. With a 3-player game, you only have 3 of these cards available to you instead of, the upper ones have 4 cards available to you. So that becomes pretty tight to get these the free cards, unless you build your engine a little more. And that's something I want to talk about too, with these nicely defined purple tracks that are on the board. So, right, all these Euro games have some tracks, and here is no different. And these tracks are pretty. They add to your engine building. And if you bid higher on a few of these locations, you get to move up some of those tracks, which lessens the cost of certain actions you get to do in the future. So that's nothing new here, but the way that they're identified, the way they're defined, the way they help you do the rest of the actions in the game, I thought that was pretty, just these different purple tracks.
By the way, I saw the subliminal advertising there. I assume when you guys say Patreons, you mean patrons.
Did I slip? Did that slip out?
You guys said it about 10 times. Patreon. Sign up for our Patreon.
On that note, go to patreon.com/boardgamehotfix. Right. Yeah, we need patrons too. So yeah, the engine building is cool, not only with those tracks you move up that give you new benefits, but also that some of the spaces you get there will let you replace your workers with these special workers. And it's cool because there's a big variety as the stack of cards that you can choose from to assign your workers special abilities. But the other place is that when you fulfill a patron's needs, then you flip it over and it slots into one of the 5 slots at the top of your board, and they have usually ongoing effects. Some of them have end game scoring effects. So it's really cool how different, the 4th round of the game or the 5th round of the game could be, and how much stuff you can do more efficiently versus the 1st round of the game. You really get to build up, and in each of our engines built up a lot different too. Like, we had different effects that we were triggering. We were at different spaces on these tracks. So some of us were, like finishing two instruments at the same time, while another person, was getting a discount of 3 resources on when they were trying to rough in a instrument or whatever. So all kinds of different effects that you can start to build to. Really neat with the engine building. here's my favorite part of this game: bonuses, 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 bonuses. They're everywhere. Everything you do in this game, you get bonuses. And it's so fun. There's this one time where I was like, oh man, the only way I can finish this patron's goals before the end of the round, in which case he would have ran away, which is another cool mechanism here. But I needed 2 more coins. I needed 2 more coins in order to be able to buy the resources I needed at the market to rough the thing and then finish the last instrument I needed. And I had to spend money at this other market in order to do a performance at this, this other part to do a performance, which would have completed the second goal. So I had all this stuff I had to do, and I was going to be 2 coins short. But I also picked up a patron, and when I picked up the patron, I slotted it into my player board. Oh, you get a bonus for any of the 3 slots you can put your patrons in. There's a special bonus there. So I managed to get the 2 coins I needed. I love when games give you just, oh, there's one, I just need this one. Oh, look at, there's one other way I can do this. And I think this game is really neat because of the order of all the different ways you can put these pieces together and around, that you can trigger one, which might get you exactly the bonus you need to be able to do something else effectively. Really like the puzzle here and putting all those things together.
Yeah, speaking of putting puzzle pieces together, I just wanted to talk for a second about what some of those puzzle pieces actually are, because there's a bunch of different things that you're trying to sort of sort together to accomplish different goals. And those goals can be a number of things. They can be satisfying a patron. They can be meeting an end game goal. They can be meeting one of the goals at the top of the board. There are shared goals, which a la Arc Nova, if you're the first person to go there, you get to pick which level you go to as long as you meet the requirements, which gets you a bunch of points potentially. But there are other factors that are going to decide whether or not you meet those goals, such as there are different kinds of instruments. You have stringed instruments, you have wind instruments, and you have percussion or keyed instruments, which each of those different types of instruments might be relevant to a particular goal or to a particular patron. Patrons are looking for certain types of instruments they want you to make, and they might be looking for certain types of instruments that they want you to repair, or they might be looking for a certain type of concert that they want you to put on. And for the concerts, there's also another type of it's the style of music that you're going to play in your performance, and that could be Baroque, classical, or romantic. And so those indicators also might be necessary for a particular goal. So there's all these different pieces swirling around that you're trying to, fit together to get to just the right combo. They're going to meet the goals. They're going to satisfy the requirements that you got for those big end game points that you're going to need.
Yeah, one thing we keep talking about are the patrons here, and those are held on your player board. I'm going to talk about the player board, which I think is fascinating and excellent for managing all the things you're doing in this game. You've got 3 slots for the different patrons, which I said are like from Frederick the Great or Chopin or Mozart or whoever, and you put those guys in. Once you slot them in, you get the bonus, and then once you're completing building these instruments, you want those to slot behind one of your patrons, not Patreons, one of your patrons. They have requirements that they want stuff done. So a little bit of order fulfillment here. But the way that happens, it's a little bit like, I want to say sort of viticulture-y. You have to start over on the left side, a rough draft of your instrument, sort of whittle it out of a chunk of wood or something like that. Once you get that done, well, it even starts, you usually pull it to your hand, and then it goes on the left side of your player board, and you whittle it out of this chunk of wood, or you get the hollow body or whatever, or you're making this little clarinet shaft, and then you rough that in over the right side, and then you put on the finishing touches. So a little bit of paint here, a little bit of polish, some finish. You're working out the you're sanding the inside so you get that beautiful harmonics coming out of the instrument, and then you finish that with your resources, your cubes that are obviously going to be here. Since it's a Euro game, we got all kinds of cubes, and then you slot that behind your patron, guy or gal. And then that completes them. That's how you get a plethora of points. You get points for finishing that instrument, points for if you meet the requirements of that patron. Then you get to flip them over, put them in for that ongoing benefit. So the player board here is great at managing all that stuff. So you got patrons, you're slotting behind, your ongoing effects are all right there across the top. Your development of your instruments are all there. A few little bonuses down at the bottom, a couple worker placement spots or blind bidding spots again down at the bottom of your player board, a couple other little bonuses, it's very well done for managing and displaying and helping to assist the flow of the game. Very impressive, very simple player boards here.
Well, you're talking about the components a little bit.
Yeah.
So we could probably move into that. It's probably about time too. I think there's a lot of mechanisms we have to. Oh, Adam's time out.
I'm calling time out. I want to talk about the market section here. It's just another supplemental thing. So this game is in phases. Chris talked about a little bit during the rules description. Before we get into the production, I want to talk about the resolution phase, right? So everyone's doing their blind auction. You get all your little chips out there. And then whoever's turn it is in turn order, you get to pick which section you want to do, reveal the auction and see what everybody bid. But instead of, if it's your turn and you don't feel like revealing any section, or maybe you need some more cash, or you need some more wood or catgut, we kept calling it the animal components that they need to make these instruments, or metal, you can go to this little market, and it's so simple, but it's just a cool little piece. You slide your little horse carriage over, and then it changes every round. The exchange rate for money, the catgut, or money for wood, or money for metal. And you can go either way. You just can't do it twice. You can't, I'm going to buy some metal and then trade that for cash, and then trade in some wood and then buy back some metal. You can't do that. So you do one, metal, wood, catgut. It has to be different, the resource that you're going to do every time. I thought that market was just a nice little extra addition. It's going to fluctuate a little bit, but not huge amounts to be so crazy. There's a little range at display, so you know what that range is going to be every time. What a cool, simple market mechanism to add a little bit of spice to the game.
Yeah, I think that it was just the right amount of spice here. I'm glad you didn't have to use a worker to go there, because I hardly used it. I mean, in my strategy, I didn't need it that much, and I would have felt a little bit bitter if I actually had to use a worker the one or two times that I did need to go and use it. So I thought that felt just about right. And I had one more thing to add too. I had one more thing I wanted to talk about real quick, just because it was the one place in the game where you rolled some dice. And again, this is like, Beck and Burson completely threw the kitchen sink into this game, because there is a dice rolling part, and that was in the performances. So you can be a great performer like these guys were, and do wonderful, roll these dice and get multiple notes. Every note you get added to the strength of the worker that you use gets you a number, and then that lets you perform at a certain level, and then different levels of performance, like how good your performance is, gets you different numbers of points. Well, I rolled, I think it was 2 blank dice, so no points. And then I get to re-roll one of them because of a benefit, and I re-rolled it and got no points. So I was the guy up there drunk on stage, puking in the front row.
Stage fright, Chris?
Yeah, a little stage fright. I was very embarrassed at my terrible performance. But it was fun. I mean, it was fun having this one little oddball place on the board where you're able to go in and roll some dice and like do really crappy. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, and it looked like all the performances, if you even just got a 1, you were going to get some benefit for it. So it wasn't really like you were getting the benefit of completing the performance and putting your, and get, potentially slotting that under your patron if that's what you're trying to do. But your minimum, you were going to get some money. But it was fun that there's that push your luck. You can put like a 5 worker out there and you need to get a 6 or more. So all you got to roll is a 1, feels like good odds. So there's a little bit of risk sometimes. And that was clever. Yeah, I enjoyed every time I saw somebody put on a performance. It was fun to watch it.
Well, now let's talk about the components in production. So let's go. We're ready.
Tim's tired of talking about mechanisms.
There's so many to talk about. We can't cover everything, especially in this case. It's funny. Chris Adam mentioned earlier, it was like putting the kitchen sink in here. And we talked about it's like the worker placement was almost like it was from Tricarion, and then the scoring was like from Arc Nova, and it felt like the push your luck was maybe from Distilled, so definitely some inspiration coming in here. And inspiration tokens as well, but that's a component. So weren't they called inspiration tokens? I think they were. Yeah, that's what I thought. All right, so production here. I think I'll just call it that this is a beautiful production, and almost end to end, it's fantastic. It's an amazing table presence, but along with that huge production and all of the stuff that's going on the boards, it's very thematic and laid out cool, and all the beautiful vintage trade artwork and all this stuff. It's a very, very busy board, And so it took a bit to wrap my head around even what I was looking at, So I don't think it's going to be super easy because of the components, because it's so fleshed out from a visuals and a thematic perspective. I don't think it's going to be super easy to introduce people to this game. It certainly wasn't easy for me to wrap my head around the rules and stuff like that because of the amount of content that's in the production, but also because of the amount of iconography that's in the production. And the last thing I'll say about that, because again, mostly it's positive here. The last thing is that this was my least favorite iconography used to represent different resources that I've ever seen, because the resources are these three different components. It's a white cube, it's a brown, like a light brown cube, and it's a gray cube. That's the animal, wood, and metal components. But the iconography that's used everywhere when it's showing you what you're spending or what you're receiving was a cube with no coloring on it, another cube that had like lines to indicate that it was shaded, and another cube that was like filled in. So again, we got over it after a few rounds, but that didn't help the recognition of what I was looking at, what the costs were to pay things. And I think I struggled a little bit with that through the whole game. Beyond that, though, all the iconography started to come together midway through the game. It's like, there's a lot of stuff here, and it's mostly language independent. So you couldn't complain too much about just having to reference that icon chart once in a while.
I'm going to make one complaint and say one nice thing about the production in this. I'll do my complaint first, since I want to get that one out of the way. And that was just the number of little components you got to have. A similar complaint to Distilled, where there's so many little stacks of cards you have to deal with. There's just stuff all over the place. There's cubes and there's cards, and it's the same thing here. I feel like Paverson Game has a tendency, and Dave Beck, to create games that have a lot of little bits and pieces. Now, that's a pretty minor complaint. I think the pieces were all used to good effect, but there were just a lot of them. On the positive side, I thought the artwork in this game was really, really nice, especially the cards where they had these beautiful pictures of instruments. I learned about some instruments I'd never heard of before, like a serpent. Never heard of that one. Some of this stuff was just really interesting, unusual, and cool to look at. The patrons were all, nobles, royals, composers, performers, and each one was a real person. I believe these were all real people. A lot of them I know were. And each of them was like this beautiful portrait from back in the day that just were so neat to look at. I really enjoyed that. I was actually excited every time we drew new cards out to fill in one of the market rows, just to see what was going to come out and to see how the art was going to look. I believe Vincent Dutrait did the art on this game, and it's absolutely beautiful. So top-notch art in this game. It would be lovely if there was a little bit less fussiness in terms of components, but again, a pretty minor complaint in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, the art is beautiful. It pops. The colors are vibrant here. That you could easily have this dull brown Euro feel. Fortunately, they didn't go the way of Stefan Feld, and they make some bright, vibrant, poppy artwork here. Like he said,
I wish people would stop blaming Stefan Feld for that. I swear he's not the one making
those
choices. Give Ravensburger some crap for his old productions.
I'm sure he picks who the artists are gonna, or he's like, let's kill my buddy up, Clemens. Let's see what he's doing today. See if he's got any bright fluorescent colors in his palette today. Nope, he's still got his old browns and greens. Let's do it. So the colors here are beautiful. The board is exciting to look at. It reminds me of that, what's that game where you're sort of trying to get to the top floor and
Donkey Kong.
Yeah, that's the one. It was like the fashion show game where you're trying to,
Rococo.
Rococo. It reminded me a little bit of that kind of board. The older one, we played the older one, not the newer one. So it's a kind of a wide, broad board with these sort of different levels. But it's prettier, I think. Well, yeah, it's tough to say anything's prettier than the artist who did the new Rococo.
Tool.
Yeah. But Vincent Dutrait does a fantastic job here. The board, at first, like you were saying, Tim, it was all over the place and tough to decipher what's going on. The iconography, oh my goodness. That's the biggest hurdle in this game for me. There is just so much to decipher and figure out. That's 50% of the puzzle here is figuring out the Sanskrit. What is this game trying to tell me? What am I supposed to do here? But it started clicking for me 2 or 3 rounds in. Oh, okay, I get what this is saying. This is pretty obvious. The symbols start making sense. It all starts coming together. The layout starts making, you start to see, you get over the iconography pretty quick, and the puzzle starts becoming the primary force here. So if you can get over that, yeah, the resource cube thing is awful. You have the white, light brown, dark brown of the cubes that are depicted as a
Cubes.
blank, and then a striped, and then a solid cube. Oh, it's rough. That's brutal. Beside that, I think the production is outstanding. The iconography starts to come together if you can translate that in your brain. Overall, a pretty beautiful production. Got to agree with Chris with the sprawl of components. There's a lot of them, but used to decently good effect here.
My last comment in this section is just that thematically, I thought this game was really neat. It's a unique theme. It really worked. Everything felt thematic. It reminded me probably most. I mean, Rococo is probably a good example, but Shakespeare is another one of kind of assembling your cast and putting on a stage play. And this felt a lot the same. You got to kind of go through the process of assembling your instruments, the different processes of it, selling them. You got to put on concerts mainly for the purpose of making money, which you can fund then the resources you need. Really thematic the way all these mechanisms came together.
Wait, Shakespeare, is that a game?
Yeah. It's an
good
older
one
game.
too.
It's fun. Yeah, it's fun. It's an older Euro, fairly similar.
I never heard of that.
A little lighter for sure, but I'd say feels like a similar arc to it.
Okay.
Cool. Well, let's jump into our final question. And that is, would you request to play Luthier again?
Absolutely, yes. I was excited about this game, and a big reason for that was I was a huge fan of Distilled. And like you mentioned before, Tim, that was my number 2 game of all time. I'm saying with my air quotes. But it's a game that I love. It's a game that I play over and over again, enjoy every single time I play it. I love the way that Dave Beck in Distilled was able to create something that was resource management and a little bit technically fussy, but at the same time was extremely entertaining and highly thematic in a unique and interesting theme. And that in Distilled, it was creating spirits. And in Luthier, it's creating instruments. So when I saw that this game was coming out, I was fascinated by it as a very, 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 very low-level musician myself. I'm interested in musical instruments. And I was really kind of dying to see, was this going to be another masterpiece, or was this going to be the sophomore slump for Dave Beck and Paverson Games? And I'm really pleased to see that this game was just as interesting as Distilled. It's a heavier game. It's a little bit, I'd say a little bit more complex, a little bit more fussy, but I don't think any of that overtakes the enjoyment of the game. It all seems to be done to good effect. I made the comment about throwing the kitchen sink in there. Threw the kitchen sink in there and Arc Nova as well, and I think that's another great game. I think this is the same kind of situation. There's lots of different stuff going on, but each one of them is fun. Just when I was talking before about the performance and the dice rolling, I was disappointed that I didn't get a chance to do more of the performances because I wanted to do that dice rolling. I wanted to do more of each of the actions that was out there. I wanted to do more of it because I wanted the benefits. I wanted the excitement of doing that particular thing. I wanted to move up those tracks. Everything seemed exciting. Everything was interesting. I would love to play this game again. I'm debating now whether I want to go ahead and back this one.
Well, this is a game I had a mild interest in before we played it. Then I watched the rules video, the great rules video by Knights Around a Table. Amazing rules explainer, comical, interesting, and well done. But despite his great rules video, I was super unexcited going into this game. I was like, here we go. Another combo cubes, get some cards, do some stuff, trade this for that, get some points. After playing it, my opinion has totally changed. I was already thinking my final thoughts before playing the game. I was like, I'm not going to request to play this one again. It's going to be awful. Maybe if, I'm sure Chris is going to love it, so I'll play it. If Chris wants to play it, I would absolutely request to play this game again. I had so much fun playing it, despite my concerns going in. The game sunk in. I started to have a lot of fun playing this. Like you said, Chris, I want to do, those performances more. I kept wanting to fulfill my little recipe fulfillment with the patrons here. Usually recipe fulfillment is just snoozy and boring, but with that orchestra, and you're trying to fill that in, kind of like the other classical orchestra game about Mozart, where you're trying to fill in
Lacrimosa,
kind of like Lacrimosa, where you're trying to fill in these columns of the composition. You have the orchestra seats that you're trying to fill in, which that is just so fun. There's so much about this game that makes me want to come back to it. So yes, surprisingly to myself, I would request to play Luthier once again.
Nice.
Well, I was right in between you guys. I was moderately interested in playing Luthier, and I liked it a lot more than I ever expected to. And I think, it's going to be a hard one. Like, I don't think I would back it because I think I would have a hard time getting it to the table. I've got some groups that would probably really like it, and there's a good chance one or more of them will buy it anyway. But the people that I play the most with, like my wife, some of my friends that are a little bit on the casual side, I think the entry weight for teaching this game, getting through the first round or two, is pretty heavy. I think it's a long teach, and it's still just like, even I watched that rules video as well. I read the rule book before, I had it as a reference, and I still struggled the first round of just, wait a second, how does this happen again? Or what do I do here? But after that first round, it all clicked and it all came together, and I was having a blast going through it. And I can't wait. I actually would love to sit down and play this again immediately, because it felt like, there's so many little goals. There's so many different motivations to go to one card market or another. We didn't even talk about, you've got some hidden end game goals that you hold in your hand that you're working towards. You've got those Arc Nova like goals across the top that you're racing to. You've got the goals of trying to get your instruments out into the first seats, or performance out in the first seats, which are going to score you. So and my favorite part were the patrons, because not only were you're trying to accomplish their goals, and you would get some basically kind of engine builder part of it, some like ongoing ability, but it was so cool to slot them into your board. And then at the beginning of each round, if you hadn't fulfilled their objectives, this little cube would move over and give you different benefits. And I started to realize, like, I should have grabbed one of those patrons, because they'll give me money, and I'm really short on money. So if I'd had one of those, I would have gotten some extra money at the beginning of the round. So even just stocking 3 of those in your player board is almost like part of the engine. Like, just get those going, so you're getting those beginning bonuses, but then get them filled before they leave and you lose points for them.
Right.
So this game has so much fun stuff going on. Probably one of my favorite Euro experiences I've had in quite a while. So really enjoyed this. Looking forward to playing it some more. I hope I get a chance to.
I want to say, but despite that flow and a little bit of fiddliness, despite the sprawl and a little bit of fiddliness, like the fussiness, like Chris was talking about, the flow is actually really nice here. Once you understand what's going on, the turns are kind of snappy. You're putting your little chips out. You know what you want to do. It's pretty focused, I think, despite the amount of components and relative complexity. The focus is there, and the flow of the turns are pretty nice.
So that gets me to a question. What do you guys think would be the ideal player count for this game?
It's always 3. No, I don't know. I think
it is always 3, but
I think 4 could be fun here because of the competition for the spaces would be interesting. I definitely think 3 or 4 is probably the sweet spot here. I think 2 would definitely be less interesting. Not that it wouldn't be a bad game, because you're going to do a little bit more of your own puzzle for the most part.
Right.
But 3 or 4 is fun here. And I think if it's experienced players, the turns are going to go pretty quick. So I think 4 would be okay. But I'm glad we played 3 tonight, because it would have been a long, slow game if in a learning game with 4 of us.
I agree. Probably 3 is going to be interesting to see what 4 is like. Open up a little more, another scoring objective at least, and another extra slot of cards, and then to have more, a little bit different competition for the resolution of that blind bid. That'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
Stereotype aside, I'm going to agree that it's 3 or 4. I'm going to settle on 3 just because I think 2, you wouldn't have as much interaction because you wouldn't be able to block people out as much. 4, I think, would drag a little bit. This depends on multiple plays. If this game starts moving along quickly, but it's not a short game. The turns, the rounds have a lot of steps to them, including putting your workers out and then activating each of those workers and coming up with the turn order for each action. So at 3, it wasn't too bad. At 4, it might get a little bit lengthy, but I think 3 or 4 would be acceptable.
Yeah. All right. Well, that'll wrap up our conversation on Luthier. We'll talk about some games that have been on our table right after this. Welcome back. What have you guys been playing this week?
So I was at camp with my family in Maine a couple of weeks ago, and it was, I'm going to say, roughly 100% humidity and crazily hot, and we're out in the woods, and there's a whole lot of mosquitoes out there in Maine because we're by a pond.
That sounds miserable. Thankfully,
what that means is that we got a lot more board games played inside the cabin. Now, this was glamping, okay? So this was, we had a cabin. In our cabin, thankfully, we were the one family within the broader family that had air conditioning in the cabin because we're just soft like that. And so we were the place everybody went to get out of the heat, get out of the humidity, and go play board games. And I got 3 different games played, all of which were great fun. One of which is Azul. I mean, Azul is the travel game. It's the game you bring everywhere. My brother brought his copy. I didn't even have to bring my copy, even though I did. But we played a couple of games of that. Had a great time. Always fun to play, especially when you're on the road. You don't need a lot of space to play it. Played, oh goodness, what was that one? The Ticket to Ride San Francisco, which I played last year at camp. My brother-in-law, Paul, who is not a hardcore gamer, but does really enjoy this game, introduced me to it. And this time I came back and he said, I can't believe that last time was your first time ever playing this game and you won. And my sister was like, well, he is like a professional board game player, which, it's only partially true. But we played again, played twice, and he crushed me both times. So Paul got his vengeance on me. And the third one was the one straight up party game that we played and had a great time with. It's called Poetry for Neanderthals. This is like in the mode of, categories and that kind of party game. Basically what you're doing is you're drawing cards, and each card you have an item on it, or 2, depending on which level you're playing. And the person who is reading the card has to describe and get his or her team members to say what's on that card using only 1-syllable words, which is why it's Poetry for Neanderthals. Great game that you can play without a table. You can sit around a campfire and play this one. Not the kind of game we normally talk about on this show, but man, if you're sitting around a campfire, there is nothing more fun than playing a game like this. Perfect for kids too, because they often speak in 1-syllable words anyway, just like us.
My daughter loves this game. I really don't enjoy it very much. You didn't talk, Chris, about the nose stick. Did you bring the inflatable nose stick?
I forgot about the nose stick. Yes, there is a nose stick, and that the person sitting next to the active player has this big inflatable club, a shillelagh, so to speak, that they use to wail on the player if they use a word that is 2 syllables or more. So don't, and then they have to yell no. You also have to yell no when you hit them with the shillelagh.
Yeah, so this always goes well over with kids because they love hitting people in the head. So it's a pretty entertaining game, but it's fine. It's fine.
Silly fun.
That sounds great. Tim's a grump. That sounds like I'd have a lot of fun playing this game with your family, Chris. I want to go camp. I want to go glamping with you and hang out in your air-conditioned cabin.
You also mostly speak in 1-syllable words, Adam, so it's perfect for you.
I don't know more than 4 syllables is off limits for me. Get that out of here.
Words big, no good.
Before Adam jumps in, though, you mentioned categories, and it's so funny because we were hanging out with my in-laws a couple weekends ago, and they're like, "Oh, let's play a game," and so they busted out categories, and my daughter loved that, and I actually really enjoy categories. This was a game when I was in my 20s and would have friends over, and we'd be doing kind of like a chill hangout, party we'd bust out categories. So I have a lot of fun memories of that. And then bringing this back, and my daughter's digging it. So we played like half a dozen games of categories last couple weeks.
Nice.
Categories is great. And Herbert Hoover always get double points for President H. Fantastic. I love that game. Okay, so Tim, you're still in town for another week, and we were able to meet up once again over at my place. We were trying to figure out what to play. And do we want to do Voidfall? Do we want to do Sky Team? Yes, I do want to do Sky Team. We didn't end up doing Sky Team. We thought of a couple other games that we wanted to play. We ultimately decided to go back to Arcs.
That's how we
This
played most of
time.
the summer.
So little imagination.
I know. Well, it was totally imaginative. This time we went and tried it with the campaign.
Yeah.
So let me show you. I'm going to go off camera for a second, grab the campaign box, and show you relative size comparison to the base game box. Hold on.
Well, he's grabbing that. So one of the interesting things is like the base game even comes with this little side module called Leaders in Lore. And the rule book says, don't play with this until you played 4 or 5 games. And we, stupidly followed that advice. And so we played 4 or 5 games of just base arcs before getting into the campaign. So, yeah. So, and I can tell already based on just starting this campaign thing that the Leaders in Lore expansion, we should have added in after the first one, because it really drove, like the campaign uses some similar mechanisms, but it basically gives you some really minor asymmetry and different objectives and special powers at the start of the game. And I think that it would actually make the game a lot more fun, even just with the base game. Anyway, I'll let Adam jump back into his description.
Yeah, so for those of you listening on the podcast, I showed the expansion box is about 3 times bigger than the base game box. A lot of that is just for storage and putting components in and stuff. But a lot of that is not just that. A lot of it is cards and extra content and all this stuff that totally changes the base game. So if you're familiar with the base game, this is a lot different. Probably, I don't know, it takes the complexity. The complexity maybe was a 3 out of 5 loose numbers here. And say that the expansion makes it about 4 out of 5. But I think that complexity is worth it. I say worth it. Am I going to play this with any of my friends around here? No, I'm only going to play it with, gamers. That probably goes for the base game too. Board game hobbyists. Everybody's a gamer that likes to play games. Board game hobbyists, and pretty, hefty board game hobbyists are probably the only ones that are going to want to do this campaign. But I absolutely loved it. What does it add? It adds this empire that has these purple ships, and those are kind of funky and weird. You can use those to kind of be peacekeepers between you and your opponents. I thought that was an interesting mechanism. And then you have these, what are they called, Tim? They're not the leaders. Is it your fate?
Yeah, I think something like that. It's
The
kind of
A,
like
B, and C.
Right. It's basically saying kind of what your faction is, what they do, like what kind of civilization you are.
Right. So it gives you sort of a goal and something to work towards and achieve, and a little bit of asymmetric power. And then there's also one of these sort of court cards that it gives you that can't be stolen. So it's a permanent court card that gives you this ability, and it gives you an objective. So in addition to scoring points up the track, you're going to have this objective, then that's a countdown sort of thing. So, a few times during the game, you might have this ability to do a certain action or do a certain something that lets you get 2 or 3 or 4 objective points, and you want to try to meet that before the end of the act, right? So now you have the campaign. It happens in 3 acts, and there's going to be a certain amount of chapters in each of these acts, and it reduces it down to 3 chapters, so 3 sort of rounds of play instead of the base game has 5 rounds of play, up to 5 rounds of play. It might be less, but here you're going to do 3 rounds of play, and then you're going to have an intermission, right? So you have chapters, acts, and intermissions. So he's trying to get that whole story component of the game. Cole Worley's trying to get this whole story component of the game going, and I think it works magnificently thematically. I was this merchant guy. I was collecting all these components. I was trying to work deals with Tim to meet my objectives. I could also trade away 3 of my components. I was the first regent, so this, the political hobnobbing with the emperor and keeping the treasury sort of over on my side, which would help me score for the different scoring criteria. So you have everything from the base game is still there as far as, selecting an ambition and trying to meet that requirement to score those points by the end of the by the end of the chapter. And then you have these additional objectives that are going on. It's just, I can't stop thinking about it. Tim, you want to jump in?
Well, I think it's remarkable, the expansion here, the way they did this campaign in a 3-story arc. It's going to be so fun to explore more, but the complexity comes at a cost, and most of it's convoluted cost. It's again, wordy text on cards. It's negotiation is kind of a built-in part to the game in this campaign, which wasn't terrible. It was pretty straightforward negotiation, but I think we played a 2-player game. It was pretty easy. I think if I was sitting there with 3 or 4 players, that might annoy me a little bit more, but it just got weightier, which is going to make it even less approachable and more difficult for some people to get to the table. But if you've got a group that would like a game like this and you can play a 3-story arc, this is fabulous. It's really neat how each of you, I really like what it did, giving us different motivations versus just going and getting those points. You still have the points. You're still trying to get those over the course of the game, but you're kind of really shifting your direction to try to meet these objectives you're doing. And our objectives were drastically different. And our starting abilities that no one could steal from us were drastically different. And it's neat how if you're successful with your civilization's objective by the end of that first chapter, then you basically get to shuffle in some more cards into the main kind of tech deck or whatever it's called, that so that some things that might be beneficial to you will start coming up over the course of the game. So it's almost like the deck gets a little bit different. But if you fail your objective, then your civilization dies off and you have to start with a new civilization. And so really interesting way that this game is going to develop out every time. The Empire ships were pretty fascinating because they changed your, the way that you're going to do combat. Like Adam said, it gave you a little bit of focus, but you could also use them as your own ships going and fighting this Blight, which is this kind of like NPC enemy out on the board. Mm-hmm. And so that was pretty neat. And then the Blight itself was also an interesting mechanism because there were these cards that would come up in the row that would occasionally trigger these crises. And sometimes they would just like blow up and do damage to you if you weren't prepped for it. So it added a lot of fun moments, I think. Getting into it was heavier than I was hoping. Like it took us a while to really get started, even though we played the base game like 5 or 6 times. There was enough new rules and new terminology and things like that made it a little tricky to get into. I really had fun with it, though. I'd love to play the campaign some more. But it kind of pushed me over the edge. I said when we did our ARCS 2.0 review that I wasn't sure if I should just sell this game. After talking to a couple more friends back home in Scottsdale and asking if they were interested in doing a campaign with me, I've got a mostly, nope, not interested. Cole Worley's games aren't for me. So I don't think I'm ever going to get this played. So I am going to sell my version of it, but I'm glad Adam has it. I'd love to re-explore it with him in the future. And of course, Adam, now that we've played through that one time, I think you could get somebody new into it, or we could get back into it a lot easier. But it's a very cool game. Glad I've had a lot of fun exploring it. This is a game that I keep saying I'm not even sure if I like it, but we're getting together and Adam's like, Tim, what do you think about playing the ARCS campaigns? And I was like, yes, I was hoping you were going to ask for that. I mean, I'm still into it somehow. So it's a weird one for me, but really cool. The campaign's really neat way to play the game.
So now that you guys are experts on this game, I need to ask you a question. Why is it called ARCS? Is it like a story arc? The Ark of the Covenant? I mean, no,
it's story arcs, I think is the intent. That's what they had in mind.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's my best guess. It's not electricity hopping from A to B. It's not that kind of arc. You're not going to St. Louis. I guess it's Arch.
They saw how popular Ark Nova was, and they're like, we got to get on that bandwagon.
It's not a big boat.
We've got more than one arc. It's like Twisters. Twisters is better than Twister, right?
But yeah, it's a story. So you have, I don't know how many, there's an A, B, and C different type of factions. So if you complete your objective from A, you can still switch to a B sort of faction. But a lot of the components, a lot of things you did, the game has a memory of what you did from that A situation. So maybe it's you added some cards to the action deck, the trick-taking component of the game. Maybe you added some little chits on the board. Those are going to still be around. So all these different combinations are going to tell a different story each time from A to B to C, and the way those link together, it's going to be crazy. So you're going to have, a bunch of highly thematic different situations that develop. There's enough flavor text on each of these little factions that give you something to go to. And Chris, I think you would actually dig this one. It has that enough storytelling, enough of the thematics are there. You get to get into the characters and the situations that are occurring in this game. Like Tim said, though, if you can make it past the rules complexity and all the little nuances and the sort of finicky stuff that you're going to have to learn to play this game, I think that you would love it. I know your group likes to play a Root a lot. Hopefully somebody from your group has bought Arcs and is going to decide to play it. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I don't know. There is a little negotiation piece, so maybe you're going to bounce off it hard. I can do Oath. I can do Root. I haven't played John Company. It's sitting back there, but Arcs is one that I can't stop thinking about.
Well, given how you guys have reacted to this game, I have a hard time believing I'm going to get out of this life without playing it again. So,
yeah, maybe. Well, the game I've been playing a decent amount recently is a game called Sail. This is a 2-player trick-taking co-op game. Pretty thematic, though. This is published by All Play, and the designers are Akiyama Koryo and Kozu Yusi. And the way this works, it's there's a map, like an ocean map laid out on the board, and it's kind of a long map, and it's maybe got like 5 spaces. They're all diamonds, and so there's like 5 diamonds top to bottom, and then 30 across the board or whatever. And the goal of the game is to get your ship. You have a little pirate ship that starts at one end, and the goal is to get it across the board to the other end. But spread throughout this map are these little rocks, kind of like, just kind of rocks you got to navigate around. But then there's a bunch of scenarios on the board, and the scenarios are different difficulties. The scenario might make the map longer, so you add on some sections to the map, or they might have you put like little kraken tentacles around the map and stuff like that. The way the game works is that just like a typical trick taker, one person's going to lead, and they're going to start with one of the 3 suits in the game, and the other person must follow if they can. So I think it's a must follow. In any case, if the person follows with a lower suit, that's fine. If they follow with the higher suit, they would be the leader on the next trick. If they can't play, I think if they can't play, I think they can then switch suits. If they switch to a different suit, that's fine. But of course, they would not be the leader then. But what's neat here is that basically your actions you're going to take have to do with the combination of suits that get played. And it's not, so there are the 3 color suits. It's not the combination of suits, but it's the combination of the symbols that are on those cards, and the symbols are based on the numbers. It's like 1 through 3 have a certain symbol on it. 4 and 5 have a certain symbol. 6, 7, 8 have a certain symbol, etc. Something like that. So if you get the 2 symbols, let's say you get 2 steering wheels, it means that you move towards the lead player. If you get a steering wheel and like I want to say like a cannon, it means that you'll move towards the lead player, but then you'll also take a damage. And so you've got this deck that's kind of like the cards you're discarding, but that also ends up being your life points. If you run into something you're not supposed to, you take a damage. So you're basically mitigating both the trying to get across the map and navigating around these obstacles, but also dealing with the damage that's being dealt to you. And there's a couple other symbol combinations that will allow you to like reshuffle some of those damage cards back into your deck. I don't think I'm getting into the exact explanation right here, but I think you get the idea. Basically, you're just taking turns playing cards, trying to think what the other person might be playing. Like a typical trick taker, a few cards are taken out at the beginning of the round. So you don't have perfect information about what cards they have and what cards you have. But you might say like, oh, if we both play a mermaid, then that's going to let us move straight. We don't have to go up or down. And this is the perfect time to do it. So I'll play a mermaid. Oops, they didn't have a mermaid. They had something else, and it made us discard the mermaid, and something bad happened. So that's the kind of thing that'll happen. I've had a pretty fun time with this. This is a really beautiful little production. It's a fun 30-minute 2-player trick taker. Each player plays with an asymmetric power that you started with at the beginning of the game. So the game has a little variability in that aspect as well, that you're getting to try to use these different powers each time you play. I've been really liking Sail for a co-op game. Not typically my thing, but it's nice hidden information. You're not really talking or coordinating with the other player at all. Reminds me in a decent amount like Sky Team. I think I like Sky Team a little bit more from that aspect, but I did like Sail a lot, and I think the production just can't be beat here. It's fun just to have that thing on the table.
Tim, you mentioned the art a couple times there, and I'm looking at it here on BGG, and I see the artist is Weberson Santiago. Absolutely beautiful. This kind of almost whimsical, extremely colorful kind of stylized artwork with the ship and the crew and all that. What a treat to look at.
Yeah, you nailed it, Chris. I was going to talk about the art also. It looks gorgeous. I've heard about this one, Tim. I've been wanting to try it. You answered the question I was going to have. Are you going to, play this one over Sky Team? You said you prefer Sky Team a little bit, but this one looks fantastic to take on the road. Is it a typical all-play box size?
Yeah, it's just one of these little
5x5
tiny,
or something like that?
exactly. Yeah, just like the Ghost of Christmas type box size.
Yep. What a beautiful game. I can't wait to try this one at some point in my life. It looks fantastic.
Yeah, in this one, and I played this in person, but I've also been playing it on Board Game Arena. It is on Board Game Arena along with Sky Team. So you guys want to learn the games, I'm happy to play it with you. They're both clever little 2-player quick, filler game. Great to end a night with if you got just a couple people left at the end of the night.
All right.
Cool. Well, that will wrap up the games that have been on our table. I did want to give a quick shout out that yesterday I was invited to join our friend Mark Johnson over at Board Games to Go. That's his podcast. And him and I had a fantastic chat. He's been in the hobby doing this podcast for 19 years, and he's been playing games for 25, 30 years. So he considers himself an old timer in the hobby. He considers us the new generation, which I take a little bit of a argument with because I'm not that much younger than him. But
How
just
old
newer.
is he? Like 125 years
Yeah,
old or something?
So we're like the NKOTB.
That's right. Yep. So in any case, had a fantastic conversation about his kind of get off my lawn attitude about new games and productions and stuff like that, and then me just the way he perceives newer games and newer gamers. We had a really great conversation. I think really insightful. It made me change my mindset a little bit. I think I changed his mind a little bit. So that's going to be releasing on August 1st. So go check out Board Games to Go. I'll probably make another mention of it on our next episode when it will have already been published. Beyond that, we have a number of reviews that we want to get to. So I've got another one this week I wanted to share with our crew and give a little shout out to our listener that gave us this review. This was our first French review, I think. So this was from Shoutout in France, and the title was Board Games Top Notch. If you like this show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. We love getting this feedback. We love hearing from you, and it will help people find the show. But more than that, we love reading your answers on the your reviews on the air, so you'll get a little shout out from us. So Board Games Top Notch. He said, one of the best board game podcasts around. I love the diversity between the hot take episodes and the top 10 list. The hosts are funny and seem to genuinely enjoy themselves, and they all have a very beautiful voice. I'm not taking sides here, so we all got to vote on that one.
Nice.
Thank you, Shikala. That was great to hear, and also we got another country under our belt now. So we want to throw your hat in the ring. Your country that we haven't read a review from yet, get in there.
And how appropriate, because unless I'm mistaken, Luthier is French.
Incredibly appropriate.
That sounds French to me. For maybe would have been more appropriate on the Orleans episode, but all right. Well, anyway, thank you so much for that review. That will wrap up the show this week. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.